I always say that you can tell what your house is not. That's
what it is. You can tell what your house is not. I love that line.
Go look for the highest priced house. Well, $750,000 buys me a 3,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage, a pool, an outdoor kitchen. Do I have all of that? No, I'm a 2,000 square foot house. Then I look for the low end, an 1,800 square foot house with a 2-car garage, no pool, no updates or anything. So I'm somewhere between the 500 and 750 in this example, right? It is what you're not sometimes is easier than determining what you are.
Welcome back to Get in the Cash Flow Game with K&K, where we talk about investing in real estate, cash flow, building wealth, and all the lessons we learned along the way. And if you can, do me a huge favor, please like and subscribe this podcast, share it with your friends and family. That way we can continue to bring you value every week and get bigger and better guests on the show.
John, thanks for coming on today, joining us. Appreciate the time. I'm super excited. I've been kind of waiting, as I talked to you before, we kind of set up for this to talk to somebody about appraisals. What a time to talk about appraisals with values and no inventory. And we're going to talk about ADUs and go through all this fun stuff. So thanks for coming on. Can you just real quick give us a brief background of a little about your history, about being an appraiser, where you're at now, and kind of, a little bit about your journey of where you got to today.
Wow, that's a long story, but I'll keep it short, Kenny. So, I am the Chief Appraiser for Class Valuation, which is one of the largest appraisal management companies in the country. I am a certified residential appraiser in my home state of California and where I started in Arizona, but I'm also certified residential in 9 other states. And that is just based on my role here at Class Valuation and the state regulatory requirements. I'm a registered property tax agent in Arizona, which doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot because I don't do commercial work, and that's really where the benefit is, but certainly took advantage of the opportunity there. I'm an instructor, so I teach qualifying and continuing education for appraisers. I also do it for assessors, loan originators through the NMLS, and also real estate agents as well. So I like doing all of that stuff. I've been in the appraisal business since 2003 and just love it.
That's awesome. So just to verify, so you're the Chief Appraiser of Class, which basically means you kind of sit, I'm guessing, above everybody. And so when people have questions or issues, you're the man that comes in to help assist or figure problems out. Is that the correct analysis?
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I mean, look, we have a whole team that rolls up their sleeves and is ready to work. And our CEO, who's not an appraiser, I've sat in on calls with them, and it's clear he stayed at the Holiday Inn Express because he knows his stuff, which is pretty cool. But we have a team full of appraisers that are here to assist as well. But all things QC or compliance related, they ultimately will hit my desk at some point in time, and I provide oversight and guidance in those departments, and just try to make sure that we're doing everything that's on the up and up. And then really at the end of the day, Kenny, and I think you'll appreciate this because you're doing the same thing, and that is looking out after the consumer and just making sure the consumer experience is a positive one. It may not be the results we were looking for, but if everybody comes to an understanding, we know what's going on, then I think it's a win.
I think it'd be cool. Because, I've been in this business almost 20 years. I know you've been in this a long time. And I think people, just like people there's an opinion about underwriters, there's opinion about, loan officers, opinion about real estate agents, there's opinions about appraisers. And I think a lot of people maybe don't really understand exactly what their job is or what exactly they do or how they can come up with different valuations and all this stuff. I mean, when you think of an appraiser, to the average person, somebody would say, "Hey, John, can you give us a definition or explain just quickly what exactly an appraiser does and, dumb it down for the basic person so they understand, are they giving their own opinion? Are they, how do they formulate, a value? It's like, is it guessing? Is it they're looking at stuff? I think people just get really confused when they, like you said, they get a bad appraisal. They're like, did this guy do his job right? Or how come this guy came out with something different? This is crazy. And if we could say that about an underwriter, why didn't one approve a file and why the other? So I'd like to hear your kind of opinion and how you kind of describe to the general public what exactly an appraiser does and kind of how they come up with the value.
Listen, I think it's a misunderstood profession, but in any regard, and it's hard to explain to somebody what it is and that you do and how you go about doing it. At the end of the day, my license and credential and my highest and best use, why somebody engages me to as a real estate appraiser, is to provide my opinion of value on real property. So I think that's a privilege, number one, to do it. It certainly is in many states like Arizona, where I'm the only person allowed to do that, right? So being a licensed or credentialed appraiser, I say. We have standards that were promulgated by the Appraisal Foundation. That's called USPAP, or the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Those are the minimum guidelines that are required, but that appraisers follow. And they start with general obligations, Kenny, that include the ethics rule, which means I must act in the best interest of the public, right? So with the public trust in mind, certainly acting as a third party, disinterested and unbiased, right? Our principles and procedures, which are part of our licensing, and those are part of our qualifications. They're pretty extensive. I mean, for a certified residential today, you're talking about 150 hours of qualifying education just to get your license, including I think it's a 1,500 to 2,000 hours working with a mentor.
Wow.
So it's time consuming, and it can certainly be a challenge. And then recognize that your opinion matters. Now, per USPAP, Kenny, they are opinions, but they're supposed to be born out of fact, right? So
Yeah.
you can't just make them up because that's what we like. We are looking through the data. And at the end of the day, depending on the assignment, and we're both primarily in the residential real estate mortgage business, right? There is a definition of market value that's already provided in the forms that appraisers use today. Those are spelled out by the GSEs primarily and used by FHA, USDA, VA, et cetera. That definition of market value is going to be based on the typical buyer without any undue influence and being well informed. And so when the appraiser is looking at data to opine on the value of that real property, those are the considerations we're taking into place. So an example I would give you is it might be very, very cool if I had a house with a car lift, maybe even two of them, because I love those short cars, right? However, if I'm trying to, and it could have cost me a lot of money to install those, right? However, if I try to sell my house, the typical buyer is looking at the house and saying, what am I going to do with this garage? I can't fit either of my SUVs in it. And so those car lifts provide no value. And so now I'm looking for a unique buyer that is not the typical buyer. And so we really look to the definition of market value in that regard. And then you want data to support that.
Yeah. I mean, I know we talked prior to this podcast just to go over some stuff. And I wanted to kind of start off because we're going to jump into, I think, what consumers deal with. Right. Yep. But you mentioned something and I can't remember what it was. I know you mentioned it. It was something about, we were kind of saying, a lot of people say, Kenny, my house is worth $750, right? Whether it's an emotional thing or a neighbor thing. And I think I can't remember the line you used, something about, always say, is your house only worth what people pay? But you're something like perceiving, maybe. Do you remember what we were talking about?
I think the general or the gist of it, Kenny, would be everybody else involved in the transaction. If it's a real estate transaction, you have a mortgage loan originator and anybody else involved there, whether it's the processor, et cetera. If it's a sale, you have two agents involved at least, and maybe a broker or two. And when you're a homeowner, and certainly as a homeowner, all of these individuals have an interest and a bias already built in, right? And so you would certainly expect those individuals to look for a specific value. And look, if I was wanting to sell my house and I looked at my neighbor's house across the street, regardless of the differences, and I thought, gee, my house has to be better than their house. I know what they do over there. I know how they upkeep the house. I mow the lawn every week. I do all of these other great things. My house must be worth more. And so in my head, that's where I'm at. What does happen for many individuals is they make improvements based on their wants and needs. And there's a cost to those improvements, no matter what it is, right? There's a dollar amount. I want to install a pool. Well, I don't know. How much does a pool cost? A pool might cost, let's say, $40,000 to install new. If I want to turn around and sell the house tomorrow, will I recover that cost? The answer is no, not today. I might recover it in the long term, right? But there has to be what we call a value in use today. And so I'm going to find enjoyment with that pool while I have it. And hopefully it'll build up value over time, and I'll recover some of that cost. So in other words, my house doesn't just automatically go up $40,000 because I have a pool. There are other improvements where the values could exponentially be higher than the cost that it was to put in. So, for example, you think improvements, and I think of a kitchen, for example. Somebody might put $40,000 into a kitchen, and in that market, that $40,000 will return $100,000.
Okay.
But again, they're all market specific, and it would be what the typical buyer would put in that market. So if you put $40,000 in a kitchen and nobody wants to pay for it, you're going to take a loss, right? So better be worth it. And I use an example. There's a really good story here to share with you. So I had two buddies. They were fix and flip guys. They were both real estate agents, licensed in the state of Arizona. So they looked for properties. They were going to fix them, flip them, et cetera. What was unique about their situation was they commingled their funds as far as their profits were concerned, but each project was their own. And the one partner had the same punch list for every property, Kenny. So it didn't matter where the property was, didn't matter how much he paid for it. It was the same countertops, the same cabinets, the same flooring, the same landscaping. Everything was the same. The other partner did everything based on what the market was pointing to. So if that market said granite countertops, that's what he put in. If it said vinyl flooring versus tile, he put in vinyl flooring. And so he maximized his profits, or at least his margin in that regard. And they thought about this like crazy, and they would get me involved as an appraiser, come in and tell us what you think the value of this property is in its condition or in its proposed condition, right? And so it was a real struggle between the two of them. And the houses were beautiful with the partner A, let's call him, but his margins were all over the place. And again, it's because he put landscaping in the backyard, and the typical buyer could have cared less if there was landscaping in the backyard.
Yeah, I think that was one of my questions. We typically say the biggest bang for your buck is kitchens, bathrooms, things like that, because typically those are the more expensive items in a kitchen or bathroom.
Right.
And that's, I know it's hard for you to answer this question because you kind of did, but I think a lot of people say, I've got a house. I think there's a couple people, right? I've got a house. It needs some love. I'm thinking about selling it. What are maybe some of the things I should do to add value? And I always tell people, I said, well, did you go online? Did you pull comps of things that sold? And like you just said, is what sold, what got what? And it's probably based on, maybe it is based on the look of the property. Does the kitchen done, the bathrooms and stuff? But is there an easy answer saying, hey, Kenny, these are the top items that typically in a house, if you do improve them, you probably will see a greater return, or this is where you're probably going to pick up more value? Like you said, you can go spend $250,000 in a backyard and have the best backyard, but you might get $50,000 in return because somebody's just not going to pay that for you, right? For example.
Listen, I think technology is our friend, right? And so the day of access to the MLS and by agents only is gone. The MLS systems are reporting to Zillow and Redfin and Realtor.com and Truly and all those things, right? So we can very quickly look at properties in our neighborhood and see the photos for all those listings. And so I think it's really important for everybody involved in the transaction to kind of go through those, right? It's amazing to me sometimes when I'm on the phone with a partner and they've never looked at a comparable property at at least the photos online. And then we'll have this conversation about, let's look at the photos of the subject property versus the property that you're looking at here. And it's like, oh, wow, that's like night and day, right? So, but you can use those tools to your advantage. You can go through them. Number one, you'll identify who markets farms the neighborhood or markets predominantly there. And that real estate agent can be a resource for you. So that's where I would start and say, hey, what are people paying for today? The second thing is look through the sales and look at the photos. Look at what people are doing to their homes. Are they just painting and replacing the flooring, or are they remodeling the kitchens? And to what extent? What kind of materials are they using? I think those can be valuable tools. And then just, again, understanding that cost doesn't equal value, and understanding time also is a money thing, right? I know I had an agent who called me and said, I need you to appraise this property. I don't know why the homeowners built the house this way, but they built it with Corian countertops. It was an option, Kenny. The default was granite. So they went down for no reason at all because the granite was covered with the cost of the build, right? So here they are trying to sell it, and they can't get a single person to visit the property. They're looking at the description. They're calling the agent. They're asking about the countertops because they don't look like granite, right? And so the agent finally explained to the homeowner that they were going to have to replace these countertops, like if they were going to sell this house at all. I think they put like 10 grand into granite countertops. It wasn't like a huge surface. And I think what they thought was the house was going to sell for exponentially more, that the agent was going to increase the sales price too. The agent actually didn't increase the sales price at all. The difference was they now had 3 people visiting the property, and it sold within 2 weeks. And so the agent had to go back to the sellers and explain time was money. We could have left this on the market forever. And if we had no traffic and no buyers, then it's all for naught. We replaced the countertops, got traffic immediately, and got several offers and took one. There was an instance where it wasn't a kitchen remodel, but you had to pay something to get people to do something to motivate the buyers.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. I think, I always say when you drive by a house and you're like, that's a very distinct, unusual house, somebody really put their stamp on it. That doesn't mean that's going to be really marketable to the rest of us. And so, as you know, right. And I think I was remembering what you're saying is, if I'm getting ready to sell my house and I go, hey, John, but the house across the street sold for $750. So mine's got to be worth $750. And I think you mentioned something like, well, Kenny, that house has a pool in this. So that means that house sold for $750 and you don't have this. So your house will never be worth more than $750. And you kind of use, if you remember that phrase, I can't remember, you used a line that was really good.
I use, again, I don't know. I have a lot of lines.
Yeah.
I always say that you can tell what your house is not. That's
what it is. You can tell what your house is not. That was like a great line for us to, like, as a consumer, to say, quit pointing and saying this house sold for $750. Like you said, go compare, but go, my house is not that, whether it's better or worse, right? Like, that was it. What your house is not. I love that line.
And that's easy, right? You can go to your market area. So where would you look for a competitive house, and go look for the highest priced house, right? And I don't care what it is. So you already used the number 750. So I look at 750 and I say, all right, well, 750,000 buys me a 3,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage, a pool, an outdoor kitchen, all of these things. Do I have all of that? No, I'm a 2,000 square foot house. I don't have a pool. I have no outdoor kitchen. I do have a 3-car garage, right? Okay, great. Then I look for the low end. Well, the low end is 500,000, and that's an 1,800 square foot house with a 2-car garage, no pool, no updates or anything. Well, I am updated a little bit. Obviously, I have a 3-car garage. I'm a little bit bigger. So I know I'm not that either. So I'm somewhere between the 500 and 750 in this example, right? It is what you're not. sometimes is easier than determining what you are.
Yeah,
That's a
love that.
bigger ask, and that's where you really need the appraiser to help you.
And so I think a lot of people, like you said, we live in a world where there is technology, there is data. And a couple of things I think would be helpful for the audience is, you know, a lot of people say, hey, I looked at Zillow, I looked at Redfin, I looked at Trulia, whatever it is. And they might give you different values. And it's saying, at first they said, oh, it says my house is. And I think people have gotten a little bit smarter to say, is my house really worth that? And, you know, somebody might say, this is what it said on Zillow. And a lot of people trust it. And I think they're getting a little bit more like, is that really right? If somebody wants to maybe go online, take a peek and go to Zillow or Redfin, is there any feedback, recommendation where you're saying, hey, Kenny, you know, yeah, they can go do that, but you got to dig a little deeper. You got to look at the comps. You got to do this. Like, is there any, you know, any feedback from an appraiser from your experience saying, you know, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to determine the value, but I'm going to tell you what this is what you should do. And based on what you do and you see, you might realize this is way off or maybe there or not. Any feedback on that? Because how would somebody just, I want to go online and just kind of estimate where my house is worth?
Well, I used to, so when I teach, I used to do this exercise. I subscribed to my Zestimate, Kenny, and so and I kept those emails, and so I would read them, and I'd read the dates, and the values change so rapidly, up and down and up and down, and so I always joked, I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, I want to refinance today, or because I need the appraisal today, or I think I'll hold off for now, right? Or whoo, wait a minute, I should sell.
Yeah.
So, but they are fun. They are interesting and they can be helpful. You just have to understand that those kinds of tools are really looking at one number. They're using the price per square foot method, generally speaking, of calculating the value of your property. So they're taking your square footage of your house, a price per square foot through the market, and multiplying those two numbers, right? And that gets you your value or your Zestimate, if you will. If you look at an appraisal report, it includes 20 something different characteristics, and we know what those are, right? View matters, the size matters. I mean, listen, would you want to, if you have a family, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath versus a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? I don't know. That's a pretty tough one, right? I think I'm just going to stick with the 2 baths.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they're the features that are associated with the properties all play into the value. And the appraiser is going to take all of those into account. So what can you do, though, in using those tools, if that's your only resource, is I would look at them, look on the map, look at how recent the sales are. So number one, understanding market conditions, which change a lot, but then look for homes that are similar to you, similar in size, that would appeal to the same typical buyer. Again, I'll use that example. A 3-bedroom, 1-bath home may attract newlyweds, for example, somebody that doesn't have kids, a single person just looking for their first home. But if it's my wife and I, and we have our first child, I think we're probably looking for a 2-bedroom, a 2-bath home, right? And so I'm going to start looking for a 3-bedroom, 2 baths. Does the garage matter? Well, maybe. How much does it matter? You know, those kinds of things, they'll play themselves out. And if you just look for houses that are most similar to you, and then you have access to the photos, right? As long as they're on there, go through the inside and look to see, is this like, be honest with yourself, right? And look to see, you know, am I in better condition than this property? Or is that property in better condition than mine? And then start setting your expectations appropriately. And if all else fails and you can't come to some sort of understanding or an agreement, then hire an appraiser.
Exactly. Okay. So let's I know we talked about, let's go over a couple of fun things I think that people aren't sure before we kind of get into a couple of things. So one of the common questions that we talked about is, hey, Kenny, so can I talk to an appraiser? Or, you know, what are they going to tell me? What should I not ask them? What's insulting? Could I give them comps? Could I give them pictures? Should I give them a list of all the improvements? Hey, Kenny, is he going to tell me the value at my house? And I'm going to let you answer all these. I think a lot of people don't know what they can do, what they can hand you. They don't want to feel like they're influencing. They don't want to step over boundaries. But What is acceptable and probably what's not acceptable, or how you're going to answer that question for, I know I can't talk to an appraiser. I know realtors, they might talk to an appraiser to let them in and stuff, but what is acceptable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, Kenny, shared in all facets of our business, right? Amongst appraisers, real estate agents, loan originators, et cetera, right? As an appraiser, there is, within the Dodd-Frank Act, there are the appraiser independence requirements, and Fannie and Freddie wrote those up, and FHA and every other lender adheres to those, right? And appraiser independence requirements are just that. They're designed to protect the appraiser from undue influence. Unfortunately, there are some appraisers that put their hands up and say, oh, you can't talk to me because that's a violation of AIR, right? Or an agent who says, well, I'm not allowed to talk to the appraiser because the last one told me that that's a violation of AIR, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is the appraiser is bound, again, by USPAP, and they're bound by the confidentiality section of the ethics rules specifically, which means think of like doctors and HIPAA, right? I can't talk about the assignment results, which is the value and those kinds of things, with anyone other than my client. So the lender, right, that engaged me in that assignment. Now I can talk to anybody about general appraisal principles and procedures. And I can even talk to them about other things related to the property, if you will. Can I receive comparables? Sure. I would actually encourage real estate agents and appraisers, real estate agents, to provide sales that they use to set the selling price, to negotiate the purchase price, and for the appraiser to receive those. Now, what you do with it is very different than just receiving them, right? Now, if an agent came to me and said, John, here are the sales and I need you to use them, right? Because we need this value. And then, by the way, if you don't, I'm just going to make life difficult for you and I'll file a complaint with your regulator, right? Well, that's a threat. And that is undue influence. That would not be acceptable. But saying, hey, John, I just want you to see these are the transactions that we use to price this property. I don't know if they'll be helpful to you or not, but I'm going to provide them to you. Great. I got to tell you, Kenny, it helps me out a lot, because if I understand where the meeting of the minds took place, and I can see in our prior example that the sales that were used are all 500 to 1,000 square feet larger, then it makes sense. And I can comment on that. The sales provided by the agent included sales that were all 500 to 1,000 square foot larger than the subject property. And the median sale price for those properties is X. So I know the subject property is not that. It's something less than, or again, more, but usually you're looking at information that's probably less. As an appraiser, I make it simple. So when I'm at the property, I try to be as cordial and as accommodating as possible to the consumer. I mean, I think it's very important. You're in their home, and there's sensitivities involved there. And so I generally would say, in response to, and by the way, it happens with every inspection. If somebody's there, what's my house worth? The easy answer for me as an appraiser, without being a jerk about it, is, I haven't put pencil to paper. Now, some people might not know what a pencil is, but I haven't put pencil to paper yet. But I promise you, I'll work on this diligently. I'll get it back to your lender, and they'll provide you a copy of the report. If you have any questions at that point in time, if you could run those through your lender, they'll get right back to me, and I'll answer those for you. That's the best thing to say, and keep it professional between all parties. I think things get said and shared, and people start getting very comfortable. Again, you're in somebody's home. So an appraiser gets comfortable, an agent gets comfortable having a conversation, and then things that maybe are said that probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's great. So this is what I kind of say the same thing. If it's an agent or if it's a client and they're doing a refi, and I go, and I might even go on MLS, I might go on Zillow and Redfin and look, and I'm like, hey, I know you think the home's worth $1 million. I'm not saying I'm not seeing it. It looks a little tight. We need to make this, I know you need that $1 million to make this refi work. Why don't you reach out to your real estate agent that sold you the house? Why don't you ask them to provide you some comps? Why don't you send those to me? Why don't you tell the appraiser, said, hey, I know value's a little tight. I've worked with my lender, my age, my realtor, brought these are what we came up with. I just want you to have them. And so the reason why I do that, John, is because let's say we're wrong or right. And let's say I go, wow, these are great comps. And okay, I can see how you get 10 million. Not that I'm the right or wrong. Somebody goes out, they appraise the property and we get 950. And I go through the comps like, so-and-so didn't use this one and this one. And so I already know we did the homework up front. We've already had conversation between me, the borrower and the agent. And we know these are the best comps we could find. And that's where my next question is the value did not come in as expected. The client's upset. And I said, hey, look, so-and-so didn't use these other comps. I'm going to go back to the AMC and said, hey, is there a reason why they didn't use them? Did we miss something? Did I not know it? And honestly, every once in a while, they're like, shoot, I missed it or I forgot or this, and we can get our value. So how should a client deal with a rebuttal? Because sometimes we have to. And I know as we're going through, like you mentioned, we were in a crazy booming market. And then we kind of, in some areas of the country, it's all different. But here in San Diego, we went into kind of a little decline, then it kind of went stable. And now at that entry level, we're starting to see prices, go up from where they were declined. And so it's kind of all over the place. So people get confused, but how would you deal with a rebuttal? Value didn't come in. How should it be handled? And maybe not how it should not be handled, because this is a common thing that not all the time we have to deal with, but we do have to deal with. You have to deal with it. I have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And, obviously the ultimate, our client is, the lender, but my client, the borrower, could be upset and they're wondering, I didn't get my value. Am I going to purchase a property? Or am I going to be able to refi? And so I'm trying to deal with that on my end.
We've been working on this for the past few months. We always want to bring as much value as we possibly can. And our partner, Prime Corporate Services, is all about bringing you a service you can't get anywhere else at a price you can't get anywhere else. Whether you're new to owning a business or owning a property, or you're an experienced property owner or investor, Prime Corporate Services is not only going to help you, but they're going to make the process so much easier. So if you book a call, the first thing they're going to do for you is help you understand what your business structure should look like, your corporate structure, tax planning, estate planning, all of that. Maybe you're saying, I'm brand new to starting a business and all this sounds foreign and complicated. Remember, this company helps new people just getting started every day. They're going to help you form the entity that's best for you and walk you through the process. Before I found this company, we paid thousands of dollars to other attorneys, CPAs, and consultants to try to understand exactly how we need to be structured to be as protected as possible. We've also gone the other route and used online platforms to form entities which unnecessarily put us at risk. You guys, you don't have to do that with this company. They'll do all of these things for you at a reasonable price, so you never have to think about saving money at the expense of exposing yourself to liability. We've searched high and low, and you will not find this much value anywhere else. All you have to do is schedule a free call today. Just go to primecorporateservices.info/GITCG. Once again, that's primecorporateservices.info/GITCG. We'll also leave the info for you in the show notes.
Listen, I think number one, Kenny, going back to the comments that we made just a minute ago, if I'm provided those sales transactions, that's what I like to call them, is sales transactions, either one or the other or both names, rather than comps. The appraiser is going to make the decision on whether or not they're comparable to the subject property. So I kind of leave that for the appraiser to make the conclusion. But if I was provided that information, and then as the appraiser, how much more helpful could I be in writing in my report that the consumer, the agent, or whomever shared these sales with me? And here's why I did not consider them, or I did consider them, their comp number 1, 2, 3, whatever. And after the applied adjustments, the adjusted sales price is something different, right? Because I think, again, for many of us, we look at a sale price. The house across the street sold for $750. We're not considering that there's characteristics, both positive and negative, about that property against the subject that may change the adjusted sales price. And that means, gee, this house has a pool, we don't. Therefore, there's an adjustment down. We're larger than that property. Therefore, there's an adjustment that goes up, right? All of those things taken into consideration. If I spell it out in my report, you have something to go back to your consumer with without ever engaging with me again, right? You're like, oh, you know what? We didn't consider the fact that this house sold for $1 million, but it has a pool and we don't. So 950, that's probably right. Now, a reconsideration of value is something different too, right? I think it's important if you believe that there is, it doesn't happen a lot, but if you believe that you have concerns or questions about the value and maybe you don't feel it's supported, I generally try to help consumers do a couple things. One, look through the report, read through it. Are there any errors that you can identify? Did I miss a fireplace? Did I miss a half bath that was in the hallway under the staircase, right? We know we've all seen that half bath. And so if I missed something, wow, man, I've got to reconsider that. And could I reconsider something else? Possibly. But I will tell you, Kenny, in some instances, it is just that. We pulled all of the greatest information that we could, and we just didn't find that one transaction. And I remember an ROV that was submitted to me, and I came in a little bit less than the purchase price. I mean, it was close. And I'm like, man, if I just had another sale in the subdivision that was similar and was priced this high or higher. So I received the ROV and I immediately received it. And my first inclination, like anybody else, is defensive about their work product, right? Like, are you kidding me? Right. At any rate, I have this exercise. I put things away. I think I told you that before, Kenny. I put things away for about 30 minutes and I come back to it. This way, my emotions are out of it. And I look at it again and I go, God, this looks like a really good sale. It looks like a model match from the photographs, the size, everything to the subject property. But I go back onto the MLS and it's 5 miles from the subject property. Now, why would I use this property if it's 5 miles away? I have all of these others. I mean, I had tons of data. And so I looked at it again and I looked at the address and it looked weird to me. So I Googled the address. The address was put the property right behind the subject property. No wonder why it was a model match, right? So I call the agent. And apparently the agent likes using this one subdivision tract. So they move the position, the geolocation of the property to a different subdivision. And apparently people call and then they're like, oh yeah, I know it's somewhere else. And they just drive over there. And she garnered a lot of interest that way. Well, had nobody brought that to my attention, I would have never found that sale, right? Instead, it did have an impact on my opinion of value. And it was the sale, by the way, that I was looking for and that they used to price that house, right? So do your homework, find the best stuff possible before you submit. The things that I would tell somebody to look out for is go through the report and look to see if that sale was already used. If that sale was already used, now look at the sale price and look at the adjusted sales price, which is at the bottom of the grid. Were there characteristics about the property that I did not consider initially? That's possible. Don't submit those, by the way. You might ask for support for the adjustments supplied, but don't submit it as though they never used it, because an appraiser is going to go, Kenny, that's comp number 4. What are you talking about? Right?
Yeah.
The other is, look for things that are within reason and don't send over a whole list. If you send over a whole list, it gives the impression that you're just trying to throw spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then oftentimes you can see, for example, the search parameters are usually included in these CMAs. And so I can see that the minimum sale price, which appraisers can't use price as a search tool, right? And we'll see that the minimum sales price in the CMA was set at $750. Well, of course, you're not going to pull properties that were less than that because your parameters were stuck. But then do go through and go through that exercise. Just look through them very quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of time, and just make sure that they're worthy of sending to the appraiser. Is somebody going to look at this? Because I look at it this way, Kenny. You have 3 comps. I can use 100 comps, right? But you have 3 on page 1, comps 1, 2, and 3. And most people in the industry and in the profession believe those are the driving factors for value. So if I'm submitting an ROV, my goal is to get one of those sales on page 1. Right?
Yeah, because that's a good, just to reiterate to everybody, whether it's John, another appraiser, or me, we're all human. I always tell people somebody could have missed something. They can make a mistake. It was mislabeled in MLS or something. So if you find something and John or another appraiser didn't get there, and trust me, he might be bummed and he was looking for that comp and you found it. He's like, great. I don't know how I didn't find this, but you found it and I can accomplish what you need. And it's a win-win, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's just, this is what happens. But you have a point there where I think a lot of people go, well, what is the best, highest and best comp? And it's not the one probably 5 miles away. It's the one that's 3 doors down, right? Right. And it's the ones that are on the front page. So that's what you're kind of saying. So you're putting a lot of weight on probably a comp that was the most recent sale and the closest to the subject property. That's like this, like, obviously you're going to use a comp that's like the subject property, but that's really, you are putting weight on that because it just sold. It's very close. It's not a model match, but maybe it's something, obviously it's in a tract kind of home, then it's a model match. But if it's in the same vicinity, same kind of style home, square footage, all that is holding a lot of weight. And I get people going, oh, hey, there's a comp that sold here and here. I'm like, well, guys, that's 5 miles and 4 miles away. We got to look a mile or less, and then we can start working our way out. But, that's really what we got to focus on here. So is that kind of how you guys look at it? Like, what's the best and highest use is kind of like the recent sale that's closest?
Yeah. I mean, the real good answer is it depends, Kenny. I know that's not what people like to hear, but it really depends. But here's what I would say is, in the sales grid, you have all of these different features that may or may not require adjustments. Ideally, the best comp is the one that requires the least number of adjustments. So the view is the same, the size of this is the same, the room count is the same, the bath count is the same, it has the same size garage, all of those things. So if they don't require adjustments, and then that likely is my best sale. I like to do some different things. So I like to see what a proximate sale is that's recent versus a dated sale. And then if I have to go further away, and a market survey is what we would refer to as a great opportunity to understand that too. So if I'm looking in the MLS and I see that this one particular agent seems to be the listing agent, that means they farm the neighborhood on most of these transactions. And I call the agent. One of the questions I like to start with is, hey, Kenny, I know that you farm this neighborhood. If I had a buyer that wanted to move into this particular market area or neighborhood and there were no sales available, what is a competing market or neighborhood that you would guide me to or guide my buyer to? And then they'll point you in that direction. And then you can look at those and you should see that they're competing. A great example of something 5-7 miles away. I remember, Kenny, it's a age 55 plus, so age restricted community, right? And if you had gone across the street, stayed within a mile, none of those neighborhoods were age restricted. And this was not just age restricted. Okay. They had everything there. You had no reason to leave this gated, guarded community, right? And so if there were no houses available, and it was a golf course community as well, then there was a competing subdivision, and it was approximately 7 miles at that time, right, that I was appraising it. And so I would get underwriters, for example, that say, what are you doing going 7 miles from the subject property, right? Well, I had to. And they are the competing comps, and they're competing because the agents who participate in that market said so.
Yeah, we've had appraisals on bigger properties where you've got to go farther because it's a big property neighborhood. I kind of call it the white elephant, which is not a great thing, but you're like, okay, well, over here, 5 miles is the big one and you're reaching, but underwriters understand, lenders understand, maybe it requires 2 appraisals, but it's, but that's not like the typical, right? But you do have to do that
occasionally. Yeah.
So one of the things we talked about, which I, really want to dive in here, is ADUs. Accessory dwelling units. Here in California, they're big. Talk to the town, especially with my clientele. We had an interesting one we worked on. I kind of call them maybe the redheaded stepchild or the black sheep. I feel like they kind of get a bad name. And so I get a lot of calls. We talked about this. I get a lot of calls, a lot of comments. Hey, Kenny, I called this lender. I can't do that. I didn't get the value. And I think to kind of back up, it's, we talked about, John, is let's go 3 years ago when it was a single family ADU. People were like, man, I got screwed on my value. And then I said, well, you didn't really get screwed on your value. There's just no comps. And then today, the single family with the ADU, there's a lot more comps. And now people are doing a 2-unit with 2 ADUs and or a 2-unit or a 1-unit with an ADU and a junior ADU. And I know we're all over the place, but we talked about a lot of this, just like anything else, like you just talked about, is comp driven. And so when we're doing all these new fun, exciting things that, yes, they are legal, yes, they are allowed. And sometimes lenders are trying to wrap their head around it and they're thinking about risk and comps. I kind of wanted to get your opinion on it because a lot of people are kind of like, how come an appraiser goes out and says, I got a house and then I converted the garage and they only gave me 80,000 and then another appraiser came out and gave me 250. And I'm not, I tell people I'm not an appraiser. It's an opinion. I can't answer the question, but I wanted to kind of have you kind of just talk a little bit about ADUs, maybe that are some of the challenges we are facing with getting values and comps. And maybe do you think as we get further down the road and there's more of these and more comps, that will help you, that will help lenders, that will help us, get the values, get the comps and make life easier?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have to happen to help, right? You have different entities doing different things, Kenny. So you have the state, for example, California, and California is not unique. You have other states that are following the same kind of trend, but California, we know the governor issued a memorandum in 2016, and then the law in 2020 with regards to ADUs, and really what that was to address the affordable housing in California, right? And so if you can basically dictate to the zoning jurisdictions, the counties and cities that have the authority over these properties that maybe didn't allow an ADU in the past, right? So think San Francisco, you need parking for an ADU, off-street parking, right? Oh, no, sorry, you can't make that happen. You're going to have to allow them the ADU. So now some jurisdictions have, they can still employ some restrictions, but for the most part, many of them have gone away, right? So that means, wow, I can have, to your point, a single family with 2 ADUs or an ADU and a junior ADU, right? Now, there's another challenge, and that is with investors, the GSEs, for example, or FHA. They have restrictions on eligibility, right? So, example, Kenny, would be in San Francisco. I mean, you could literally have, let's call it a 10-unit condominium structure, and each one of them have an ADU, right? However, if you had a 2 to 4 family unit, which is residential, right? Could each one of them have an ADU? Yes, but is that eligible for traditional financing? No, right? For Fannie and Freddie, and FHA for that matter, will they allow a second ADU? No, I mean, it's not eligible, right? So you may think this is great. The state is allowing me to generate, to create this additional unit. But now all of a sudden you've created this environment where you're not going to get typical financing. Could you go non-QM or something else? Yes, right? And now you're talking about other issues, and that's appraisal related, and that's comp driven. And do I have enough data to support that? And what does the jurisdictional authority say about this type of property? And so again, you got to consider too, people do weird things, right? I don't mean weird like on purpose or they meant to do it this way. It's their property. And so they did something that appealed to them. Unfortunately, some of the things that we do as homeowners to our homes, it might create some problems with regards to eligibility or financing, or again, what is typical for that market, right? And so I would encourage people, one, to make sure at the very least, if you don't want to start calling your assessor or your planning department, is at least pull the documents. They're available in libraries, but they're also available online. I find them in most places, and look at what's allowed under the zoning. And then compare that to the governor's law of 2020, right? From a a cost perspective, it is a big challenge. And for appraisers too, I don't want to say what's right or wrong, but what you're talking about is, listen, if I put in this accessory dwelling unit and I spent $250,000 on it, how is it only worth $25,000? What it sounds to me like is the appraiser is taking their square footage adjustment, Kenny, that's based on the primary dwelling and applying that to the total square footage of that ADU. That's not really what I would be looking at. I really should be focused on the income approach, because chances are you're building that ADU to rent it and generate income. And that income is going to be relevant to that appraisal problem.
Yeah, because but do you think as we get further and there is more comps, it will be easier for, you as appraisers to create values and things like that? Obviously, just like, kind of just common sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one, I'll always ask and make sure that you're getting an appraiser who's experienced and competent in appraising those types of properties. Understanding, again, most people aren't going to spend $250,000 on something they're not going to be able to get a return on that investment, right? So somebody's already done the math there. Consider the cost approach if you're an appraiser as well. But again, I mean, sure, the plethora of sales transactions in the market always help, right? So the more commonplace they are, I don't know if, ADUs, if they just don't sell as much once they're created, like, why would I get rid of this property? I think solar is the same way too, a little bit, at least in the past, right? It's a known fact. People who have solar tend to stay in their properties longer. So if you're an appraiser looking for a sales transaction comparable that also has solar, you might not find that because they haven't sold it, right?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of people doing ADUs, it's to add additional cash flow. That's really what they are. And so they're not selling them. So we're not seeing those comps. I know a lot of deals that are getting down. I'm like, but they're just not selling because they're like, I built this for the cash flow.
Yeah.
John, so kind of wrapping up, what do you think, what do you think the market, the real estate market from an appraiser point of view, is the biggest challenge? Do you think it's just inventory, lack of inventory that is just, causing challenges right now in the market, just from kind of your standpoint, whether it's not enough homes for buyers, or is there anything else that's glaring that we're not seeing that you guys might, you're seeing the biggest challenge in the market today?
Well, I'm empathetic towards appraisers in this regard, and you already mentioned it, and it's the ebb and flow of the market today. We're not seeing this trajectory in one direction or the other. We do know the market peaked in May or June, depending on which market that you're looking at. And I'm talking about which MSA, for example, right? We do know that for many markets, as you just pointed out, there was, with the rate changes at the new year, they saw a little bit of a bounce back. Some have recovered, not all the way to May or June, but some of them have recovered and recovered quite nicely. Others continue to be on that trend. I say that's the biggest challenge today, is understanding and measuring those market changes and influences, being able to not just measure them, but report them. And that means market-based adjustments on date of sale. And I got to tell you, Kenny, like, if you think from an appraiser's perspective, trying to address an AMC or a lender and their underwriter, to see a property that, let's say, sold in May or June, and actually have a negative time adjustment because that was the peak of the market, right? But then I see a positive time adjustment for a house that sold in January or December, right? It really takes some folks to start wrapping their minds around that, and some really good explanations. And that's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I think the market changes today are the biggest challenge. I mean, certainly inventory is a challenge if you can't find comps, right? And all of that good stuff. But today, I think for appraisers, with the amount of scrutiny that is placed on their appraisal reports, and the expectations that they're coming in accurately, date of sale, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know San Diego, fourth quarter was declining. Then I told you we kind of went stable in some areas. Now it's going up. And I'm like, and you're kind of like, as an appraiser, like, well, if I go back and use that comp, that's when the market was declining. But if I use this comp, it's stable. But if I look in the last 60 days, it's here. And it's like, I'm like, you guys do have a tough job right now because it's hard. And then people last year, they were listing their houses. Fourth quarter, we're trying to go, well, there's a comp in June. You're like, yeah, but that was the peak of the market. And you're trying to pull it in. It was such a, it's been a wild ride. So
market conditions. And again, what you just said there, expectations. My dad was started to try to sell his house in August. And every time I talk to him, he keeps telling me, these agents, they don't know what they're doing. They keep telling me this is what I can sell it for. And I'm like, Dad, you keep on talking about these houses that sold in May and June
of 2022. Yeah.
It's not the market today. So, again, expectations can play a big role in that challenge as well. But yeah, the market conditions, man.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time. This is really awesome. I hope that, I think we address a lot of things here, but I think from a consumer standpoint, they can kind of understand, just like underwriters, appraisers are not bad guys, bad women. They're just trying to do a job. They've faced a lot of challenges as well, just like we all do. And like you mentioned, lack of inventory. I mean, within the last 6 months, some places saw a decline, a stable, and an increase. And you guys are trying to figure this all out and trying to come in on value and you guys are just a part of the deals, everybody else trying to make deals happen. So I appreciate the insight, the expertise, and just kind of going through all these questions, hopefully help people understand a little bit more about what you guys do, the process, and kind of what they can expect, with an appraiser moving forward.
Kenny, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was fun to talk to you before. We appreciate your partnership as well. But I enjoy the opportunity to help. Again, at the end of the day, I think you mentioned that the consumer is really your client. I remind folks involved all the time. I've actually moderated a session at a conference and I had everybody up on stage. I had an underwriter, I had a loan originator, I had a real estate agent, I had an appraiser, I had a trainee. What they didn't know is I also had a borrower. That's my Michigan accent coming in, by the way. A borrower is the consumer. And so, Kenny, I had this individual on the end of the stage and I said, by the way, that person is all of our client, right? And they're the ones that we're serving. Now, that doesn't mean do anything unethical or whatever, but it does mean that they are the consumer and we should understand that and respect that and work to help them. So that's what I'm here for. And I couldn't do it without your help. So appreciate you.
Hey, appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Okay. Bye.
If you're already a real estate investor, you know that aside from cash flow, you also get huge tax benefits by investing in real estate. But are you taking full advantage of all the potential tax benefits? We've been working with Tim Looney at CSSI for a few years now, and he's saved us and our clients hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in taxes doing cost segregation studies on their properties. Let me give you a few examples. We bought a property in 2019. If we had just used straight line depreciation, we would have saved about $18,750 in taxes. But because we did a cost seg, we saved $258,000. That's $239,350 more than standard straight line depreciation in the first year. The other great thing is, if you're classified as a real estate professional, you can apply this to other sources of income like W-2 or 1099 income, and you can also roll over any unused depreciation to future years. If you've owned your properties for a few years already, don't worry, you can still do a cost seg and save big on your taxes. This is not tax advice, so consult your CPA to see if you qualify to take advantage of these benefits. Call or text Tim at 318-469-9861 to get your complimentary property analysis. Once again, that's 318-469-9861. And I'll also include his information in the show notes. You guys don't want to miss out on these tax savings.